It's an honor to be here today for this important commemoration. Today we remember that even when war ends, not everyone comes home. One of the worst tragedies of war is that some soldiers simply become missing. Their loved ones both mourn and hope. The years drag on, and the long wait for answers can become intolerable. What could be worse than the emotional turmoil of not knowing? My uncle was Sergeant Peter Petit. He fought in the battle at Punari in North Korea and went missing in action on November 26, 1950. His remains are among those still missing. My grandmother lived to be 89 years old and never knew what happened to her only son. National POW MIA Recognition Day was established in 1979 through a proclamation signed by President Jimmy Carter. Since then, a presidential proclamation brings our nation together each year on the third Friday in September. There are currently more than 81,000 Americans unaccounted for since World War II. A ceremony is held every year at the Pentagon and features members of each military branch of service to recognize our prisoners of war and missing in action. As Americans, we are asked to pause and reflect on the sacrifices made by our military men and women who are unaccounted for as a result of their service. Since 1999, it has been a tradition to create a poster commemorating National POW MIA Recognition Day. This year's poster is on display at each side of the podium. During World War II, shortly after Pearl Harbor, American soldiers stationed in the Philippines were forced to surrender to the Japanese. This resulted in the taking of Filipino and American POWs by the Japanese and their infamous 65-mile Bataan Death March. They suffered in the tropical heat, and those that fell behind were shot or bayoneted. Approximately 600 Americans died at the prison camp from starvation and disease. The men fighting during the Korean War were barely adults. Some were as young as 17. Their time in captivity would be more horrific than anything their young minds could have imagined. Shortly after capture, communist troops gathered up their prisoners and herded them into animal pens, which provided no shelter from the 30-degree below zero temperatures and whipping winds. Chinese troops forced them to remove their outer clothing, leaving them with only a thin field jacket, a scarf, and a small cap. They forced their prisoners on long, horrific death marches with very little food and water. The captors placed them in small sweat boxes where they lived 22 hours a day for 8 months. An astonishing 38% of U.S. prisoners died in captivity in Korea. A quote from the late Senator John McCain reads, "The most important thing for survival is communication with someone." McCain developed a code so he could communicate with the man in his neighboring cell, Wayne Smith. They continued to communicate to keep up their spirits, as did other prisoners in Hanoi. After a year of imprisonment in Vietnam, John McCain was offered early release, but he refused to leave his fellow prisoners behind. He remained a prisoner of war for 5.5 years, 2 of those years in solitary confinement. It was not until the Vietnam War that the United States changed the way it acknowledged its POWs. It took a divisive war to change attitudes. All our prisoners of war endured unimaginable hardships at the hands of their merciless captors. Their faith in God, their resilience and unbroken spirit kept them alive. Today, many former POWs still suffer from the physical, emotional, and mental scars of war. The National League of Families POW-MIA flag symbolizes the United States resolve to never forget our prisoners of war or those who served their country in conflicts and are still missing. Mary Hoff, a member of the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing, gets credit for coming up with the idea for such a flag. Her husband was shot down in a flight over Laos during the Vietnam War. His body was unaccounted for. Newton Heisley was hired by a graphic design company to create the flag. Its design was based on Mr. Heisley's son, who was medically discharged from the military. The flag features a white disc bearing a black silhouette of a gaunt man in profile, a guard tower, and a strand of barbed wire in the background. He also penned the words, "You are not forgotten." In 1982, the POW-MIA flag became the only flag other than the Stars and Stripes to fly over the White House in Washington, D.C. And so it has become a symbol of a principle that doesn't just apply to Vietnam, but to all members of the United States for serving their country abroad. Freedom is not free. It comes with a price. Let us never forget our prisoners of war and those missing in action who paid the price. We owe a debt of gratitude to their families whose loved ones didn't come home. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you.